The largest group of immigrants, of course, who are here are from Latin America, and amongst the Latin Americans, Mexican immigrants are about 2/3. Central American immigrants, who are not the initial wave, are now about 1/3 of the Latino immigrants. So that's kind of the past to the present, what's going on in terms of the current realities here in South LA. One important thing to realize is that South LA has very high poverty rates, but interestingly, the poverty rates are significantly higher for the for the Latino community than they are for the African American community. So, for example, in 2008, 2012, about a little bit less than 30% of African Americans are living below the poverty line. That's about 1/3 of Latinos. So the poverty experience is even more profound for Latinos in South LA. It's very profound for everyone. You can also see this in terms of median household income. This shows you it in 1990. South LA was poorer than the rest of the county. But what I want you to pay attention to is the following thing, which is kind of interesting to watch. This is the black, gray is the median household income. This is Latinos. Again, the gray is the median household income in 1990. And look where it's at in 2008, 2010. The interesting thing to note here, these are in real dollars, black household income actually fell. Latino income was stable. How can Latinos be simultaneously with higher rates of poverty and have stabilized their income? Putting lots of poor people into one house, right? Which gets your household income up, even though you've got a lot of people living below the poverty line. But one of the things that this implies is that the black middle class has separated in large part. There's been a big outflux, and I don't mean to say that really as dramatically as that, because there's significant black middle class in South LA, significant black middle class institutions, but there's been a large exodus of that black middle class as well. So the other thing to note here, which we find kind of interesting, is the home ownership rates by race and ethnicity, and then I'll talk about what all this means. So what I want you to pay attention to here in particular is, again, the gray bars for African Americans and Latinos. We have Asian Pacific Islanders in here as well. There's very few whites who own homes in South LA, although that's increasingly happening now in West Adams, Normandy. There's a lot of gentrification that's going on with that. But what I want you to notice is that in 1980, the black home ownership rate was 40%, but the Latino home ownership rate was only 22%, much lower. Does that make sense? Now watch what happens as we move forward in time to 1990, 2000, and the most recent data. If you noticed, essentially Latino home ownership has gone up, African American home ownership has gone down. Again, there's been an influx of the community, people are setting roots, people are buying houses. A large part of this story is a housing story, but it's also a foreclosure story. Because I noticed this the other day, I don't know if you guys did too, there was this map the LA Times had, and they said, there's lots of foreclosures all over Los Angeles. And then I looked at the map and I went, they're not all over Los Angeles, right? That foreclosure rate, if you look at this map, is densest in South LA. It's also fairly dense in the San Fernando Valley. But here's the San Fernando Valley. There's a lot of foreclosures. The yellows mean that's an address with at least one foreclosed property. The orange dots are it's foreclosed and there's been a complaint about abandonment. So that's the San Fernando Valley. There's lots of foreclosures. But here's South LA. Super foreclosed and lots of complaints about houses that have been abandoned. So this is really critical because what it means is a lot of people who bought houses, just got their toehold in, are facing real issues with regard to foreclosure, the loss of their assets, etc. So what does this all mean in terms of future directions? I know Benny's looking at me. He can't believe that I actually did this in this short of a time because he knows there's 60 slides in here. So that's the advantage of speaking fast. And as I always like to tell people, I would have spoken faster in Spanish. Y ustedes, una parte de ustedes iban a entender. Okay, so what do I think is really key to take away in terms of leading for transformational change in South LA? The first thing I would say is there's a tremendous sense of pride of being from South LA. And that sense of pride is not ethnic specific. I began to notice it at USC, both the change and the sense of pride. Because I would, in my classes that I teach in LA, I would go, well, who's here from South LA? And when I was asking that question 7 years ago, the majority of hands going up were African American hands with great pride that they were from South LA. The last year or so, it's been almost entirely Latino hands, but with the same pride that they're from South LA. When you are from South LA, and I think it's Jorge Nuno who said this the other day, you grow up tough here, right? I mean, these are tough circumstances economically, in terms of safety, schools, etc. And people who make it out of South LA are people with great strength, great attachment to the place, a great willingness to break through and to return and actually make a difference. And so there is a sense of pride of place, which is very important. It's one of the reasons why we have got a project we're doing that I've been talking to me about. I mean, for those of you in the East Side, there's a great book you may know from by George Sanchez called Becoming Mexican American, which is about how East LA made the Mexican American. South LA is making a different kind of Latino. It's making a kind of Latino that's much more used to black-brown coalition building. It's making a kind of Latino that listens to hip-hop music, right? It's making a kind of, or ska, I know. It's making a different kind of Latino, and it's being formed by the place. And so I think importantly, you can use that sense of place and pride of place to build a common identity. And the reason why that's important is because I think in building Latino leadership, you need to stress the need to build bridges, not take power. It's not a question of growing a Latino leadership because we've been underrepresented for years and my God, we need to get there and take power over someone else. It's about building bridges with communities. It's about understanding that there's no fundamental way that immigrants will get full human rights. No fundamental way that Latinos will find their place in the United States unless African Americans do as well, since that struggle for African American freedom and social justice has been absolutely central to any movement forward for social justice in the United States. So it's about building bridges, not taking over. The third thing, and Benny was speaking to it, we need to build capacity to plan a better future. One of the reasons, it is certainly not the only reason why the Promise neighborhood Promise Zone designation didn't come to South LA. And that had a lot to do with issues of how that grant was written, etc. But what it raised was, is the capacity in South LA ready to apply for, anticipate, and receive a big grant from the federal government? And the capacity needs to be strengthened because you get a series of legacy institutions and a series of emerging institutions, bringing them together, building the bridges, building the capacity to plan is important. And the way I think to frame the coming together is that what people in South LA have in common is everyday social justice. The things that people who are immigrants are worried about in terms of perhaps being picked up by ICE and being deported are the same things that both young African American and Latino men are concerned about in terms of being picked up by a police force that may terrorize the community and make them fearful of the police and incarceration. The same issues that parents have with regard to being able to access English as a second language in job training classes through the community colleges and through adult ed, those are the issues that young African American and Latino kids coming out of South LA who want to tap into LA Trade Tech have in terms of being able to come through. Framing things in terms of everyday social justice is really, I think, kind of the key way to go. And I'll just say one last thing. I want to thank this institution and thank South LA for the following thing. Some of you know, my dad actually came to the United States in the 1930s with papers that were imperfect. And he was able to stay as a result of the war, and I won't go into that story. But when he moved to California, a guy with a 6th grade education who was a janitor was able to come to LA Trade Tech. And by coming to LA Trade Tech, he learned about electricity, and he became an air conditioner repairman. And my family moved from being poor to being working class, and we were able to succeed as a result. Having those institutions that can be the platform for success for families and children, that's what we have in common in South LA. It's a place to be proud of, and these changes mean it's a place where the nuances of leadership development need to understand the changes. Thank you.